Thanks everyone for coming in the after cake slot. Hope we'll make it entertaining enough and fast-paced for you to have a good time and not fall asleep. So we're going to talk about building a bank at Upvest, which happens to be the company the two of us are working at as heads of engineering, which is a B2B investment infrastructure provider. So we're doing background investment infrastructure. You can think about us as the Stripe for financial investments. And one of our most well-known clients are, for example, N26 and Revolut. And we'll start by telling you how this all started. And Lutz is going to take you through that.
Right. Oh yeah. Oops. Okay. This is Upvest. This is the people there. And yeah, how did it start? If you were at Vanessa's talk just after lunch, you heard about a holistic approach to engineering, and that there are also outside forces, right? And for Upvest, the way we were initiated, there were definitely outside forces. There was a few people working in the crypto space, and they realized a huge business opportunity, retail investment, right? So there are predictions that retail investment means people like you and me, like individuals, invest in shares or ETFs, right? Put money into the stock market. And this is a growing market, predicted to be, yeah, well 21.3 trillion euros. I think that's worldwide. So don't quote me on these numbers. I'm not a business person. Anyway, so it's a huge business opportunity. It's a market that's going to grow rapidly, and the prediction is that this market is going to be conquered by people offering certain features, certain capabilities that traditional banks don't provide. One is the accessibility, right? The possibility to make really small investments. Like I want to buy Apple stock for 20 euros, right? Fractional shares to leverage the whole market of people that don't have a lot of disposable income, but still want to save some. Long-term wealth building, right? Instead of trading, stock trading, you just want to save. It's like a savings account. You buy a low-risk ETF continuously and keep it until you retire. And you want very customized investment experiences, right? Maybe you only want to invest in software companies because you're a techie, but also only in European ones, and only in ones with a certain market cap, right? So you want to be able to kind of build your own index. You want to have some technology that allows you to do direct indexing or internal indexing, so you can offer these personalized experiences. And this is what we build the infrastructure for, right? Currently, for a lot of traditional banks, they can't offer these things because basically they run on COBOL and fax machines. What we do is we build REST APIs so to use this, and we have a banking license. Any one of you could start a fintech startup, build some app for people to invest, and you could use our service as the backend. Right? As Florian said, it's completely B2B. Yeah. So much for the sort of the energy behind this, right? The drive, the external forces. So our founders realized this business opportunity and said, hey, let's build something. Let's build some great software and then build a company that taps this market. How do we do this, right? And so the story of this talk is a bit chronological. It's a bit about like how did we set out, and then where did we end up, and what were the learnings along the way. And we set out, the founders got together and from the start talked about, okay, what are the principles that drive us? Also in software engineering, what are the engineering principles that we want to base our development on? And one was product thinking, right? We don't want this gap between business and engineering. We don't want engineering to be a service to the business. We want value-generating teams. We want engineers to be domain experts. And this is why we call them product engineers, right? To kind of manifest this thinking. For us, all the software engineers are product engineers. And I think this also really well aligns with domain-driven design, right? We have this where the business concepts are ubiquitous and you find them all across the code base, and everything is driven by the domain needs. And lastly, there's a quote I love by Alberto Brandolini, who said, the event storming guy, right? He said, software development is a learning process, working code is a side effect. So I don't know if our managers always see it that way, but I love this. I love this way of thinking, and I hope a lot of software engineers at Upvest think this way. Like we learn about this complex domain, and as a side effect, we also produce some code. So this is not a diagram of some system we built. This is from the really early days. This is like from an early day presentation 2020 or so. Again, the founders came up with, we didn't start with a big ball of mud, as some companies apparently did, as we heard today. They started with defining subdomains from the start. So applying domain-driven design, breaking this down. Funnily, I think we kind of forgot about this for the last couple of years because some things actually ended up in different domains, and it's really nice to revisit this and realize, okay, oh, this static data, like market information, this actually ended up in the team doing the MiFID reporting, and then it did feel weird. It's nice to come back to this and say, oh, we actually had a plan for this. It was supposed to be different. Cool, yeah. So very domain-driven. It got a bit messier over time. We're going to talk about this a bit more. What we're not going to talk about is platform and platform engineering. Also a hot topic. We couldn't fit it into this talk, except for this slide. So I'm just going to say 2 words on this. You see this little internal tooling bit here in the bottom. This is basically all the thought they put into platform. The idea is there's going to be some shared tooling. We have a very minimal platform. It's all cloud native, right? Actually, it runs on Google Cloud. We use GitOps, infrastructure as code. So the engineers modify some YAML files, push it to Git, and Argo CD puts it in the Kubernetes cluster. And we have some shared tools and some shared libraries as well, right? There's some functionality that all teams use. For example, we're very big on event-driven architecture. So if you are doing event-driven with Kafka, you've probably heard of transactional outbox, a pattern that for reliable publishing. So we have a library for transactional outbox that every team uses, and there's one of the shared libraries there. So this is a really minimal platform thing and some shared libraries. Engineering principles. I said we build on strong principles, and it's really not much. If you print them out, it's probably 2 pages or so, but they really served us well. It's almost like a well-defined engineering strategy, right? Because it brings this clarity. People can kind of cling to this and say, oh yeah, I can base my decisions on these principles. Like, yeah, okay, I pick choreography over orchestration. We want to be event-driven. Domain boundaries are actually important to us. Resulting from this, our architecture is actually super simple. I'd rather show this than an architecture diagram, because the architecture diagram is a box, an arrow to a Kafka topic, or to Kafka, and then more boxes with more arrows to Kafka, right? It's really just isolated services communicating internally over Kafka. To the outside world, of course, we also provide REST APIs. Yeah, is there anything else I wanted to say about this slide? Yeah, this worked well. Oh, and then there are still some decisions to be made, though, right? Even if your principles are great, if you have principles and guidelines. I strongly believe for software architecture, I strongly believe in management by principles and guidelines, right? If you have a problem you need to solve, your first question should be, what do our principles guide us to? What is the way? It shouldn't be opinionated necessarily, right? Like, I like it this way, or maybe let's do it this way, or I just read this. You should be able to go to your principles and then hopefully get some guidance from there. But there will always be some decisions that still need to be made, right? We have very autonomous teams. We actually started off with pretty small teams, 3 to 5 people. Engineers plus tech lead. The tech lead is a bit of a mixed role, both individual contributor and manager. And they can make a lot of decisions for themselves. And if they feel, okay, this is something that affects all of the teams or many teams, or this is something we want to get some we want to get some buy-in from the others, or just want to get some peer review, they would create an ADR, and then the tech leads would vote on it, right? So there was no architecture function or board or architecture governance. It was very bottom-up. And this served us well for a while. It is a challenge with alignment and stuff. We're going to come to this later. And lastly, again, coming to the principles, we do have a pretty well-defined software development, or call it the secure software development lifecycle, right? So the whole software lifecycle from basically product board, product idea to deployment is well-defined and automated because we are regulated, right? We are building a bank. So we need to provide this auditability, this traceability, right? For every feature we build, we need to be able to show to which deployments and production it actually led, and the other way around. So we apply a lot of automation to provide this traceability, and then just a little bit of this is this double diamond that re-emphasizes the way we want to work in an agile fashion, right? To expand the problem space and focus or find the problem to solve, and then do the same for the solution space, open it up, consider all the possible solutions, and find the best one. So I would call it, we have a kind of post-Scrum, if you will, process. We have an agile process, but it's very non-regulated. The teams we expect them to follow the SSDLC, of course, the process. We expect them to reflect and continuously improve, right? To do retros and review the processes. Other than that, they're pretty free to do what they want to do. Like a lot of them kind of 2-week cycles, not for delivery. We have continuous delivery, but they have 2-week retro cycles or planning cycles. Some use story points, some don't. It's funny sometimes. Sometimes a new tech lead comes in and a tech lead came to me and says, oh, we have these 2-week planning cycles, so I don't like it. And I said, well, don't do it. And we thought that they have to do it. Sometimes the teams don't realize how much autonomy they have, but we really value this. So this is how we built the first version, right? So starting sometime in 2020 to like early 2022, we built the first version of the investment API, as we call it. Now we're, let's say, in our storyline. We're now in early 2022. We're maybe like 45 engineers or so. And again, outside forces, the market is great, right? It's zero interest rate time. People need something to invest their money in to get some revenue out of it. So a lot of people still go into the stock market. And also venture capital is pretty loose, right? Because, they can refinance themselves pretty good. So we're expecting like monumental growth. So we set up the organization for growth. And the idea of our CTO was we hire from the top. We built these 7 tribes for 7 different sort of domain areas and hire heads of engineering for them. Of course, there are already, as I said, there are like 40 people actually working there already. But the idea was then, obviously, you don't need 7 sort of lead of leads for 40 people, right? So the idea was to hire from the top, for them to hire the tech leads, and then for the tech leads to hire the teams to kind of parallelize the whole hiring process and grow the organization. So yeah, and this is the point of time where I hand over back to Florian, right?
Thank you, Lutz. So Lutz told you how the stage was set, how everything looked very beautiful in 2022. We just launched with our first customer, and we were a live business with revenue, enough investment and banking licenses to drive the business, and a setup with 7 heads of engineering to grow into all product directions we would want to go. So what could possibly go wrong? And I'll talk about the things that went right and survived from these principles and foundational layers, and what didn't survive the test of time that well in the next minutes. We're now in about early 24, so it's about 1.5 years in. We have launched more customers. We're a thriving business, so everything is going well, but we also see some growth pains. At that moment, we grew to about 80 engineers, so we doubled the size of the engineering organization. The whole company was at 150. What really worked well over time and pulled us through everything is the product engineering mindset in engineers. Having engineers be very flexible and outcome-driven worked against all the silos that emerged over time that you get when you hire a lot and you build a larger company. And it allowed people to be very collaborative, to be flexible, to really solve problems also against the odds. So this is something that is a great takeaway. As a greenfield organization where we were able to shape values and working styles, this was a big asset. Another one was strong automation and traceability from the beginning. Lutz showed the double diamond software delivery lifecycle. We had very strong technical guidance in automation that enabled us to, in a very loosely coupled organization with autonomous teams, to apply to regulatory standards and make sure that we could trace all software deliveries. So autonomy balanced with tooling that made sure that things were going orderly. And lastly, this autonomy and alignment, the principles, a principles and guidelines-driven culture worked very well to have teams optimize for their domain and not couple too much and make decisions heavy. But with that growth, there were cracks in mostly the alignment. So we had more teams, people came in anew, they were not part of the original bunch that was developing these principles together. So they were introduced to the principles later. And the principles did not have a ton of context. They were one-pagers, which mostly principles with no implementation details about them. So teams went tiny different ways. So we saw misalignment, teams doing things differently left and right. The mode for making decisions and adapting architecture over time was becoming much more difficult because it was more people that need to be orchestrated. So the ADR process, that was very simple at the beginning, became much more difficult and stalled a bit because there were too many people involved. Our shared platform, libraries, teams needed capabilities and they started forking a shared platform that was unified in the beginning, but they needed capabilities that were not there, and because it was a shared ownership, they did a fork to not create dependencies on other teams. And OKR planning, we use quarterly OKRs to align the organization, also became very difficult because if you have 7 tribes that, at least on the tribe level, need close alignment, this leads to long discussions and minute adjustments to make sure that with all the dependencies between tribes, you can deliver. So alignment was a big thing. On the micro level, we've seen that the domains grew unevenly. We had some teams that dealt with the load easily, so they were more relaxed and were able to do development in their domains, but some had complexity growing in their domains. We had a Texas team that, when you have worked with Texas, you can probably guess that this comes with high complexity, especially when you start internationalizing and onboard multiple countries' tax legislation, which was also responsible for other things besides taxes. So this was one of the teams that was very low on extra capacity and became very stressed. We, at this time, chose to go for collaboration and had people do cross-team contributions to support and take off the edge in these heavily loaded moments, but did not approach the fundamental issue of uneven domains. And teams were still at the 3 to 5 people stage. Architecture became a very reactive thing, so that early culture of driving decisions very fast that had stalled, the constant pressure for delivery and the need for coordination between teams to make architecture decisions led us to a very reactive mode of doing architecture. It was not strategic in any way. We looked at that and found that the basic process for decision making is still good, but we need to do something to make that more inclusive and work with the system instead against it. So we introduced an architecture guild to do that, which was a very inclusive process that when cross teams had drivers with our staff engineers and brought enough cross-team visibility and cohesion to drive topics that were not in one team's remit. Focusing on the principles, but also evolving them. When we introduced that, it became a bi-weekly meeting, and people brought topics there. So there was a lot of traction actually in the architecture guild. But what didn't go away was the fundamental lack of capacity, and the autonomy that teams had meant that when you had bigger architecture initiatives, you needed to trade that off against feature delivery. And because teams had their own autonomy, own roadmaps, you needed to coordinate widely and break down architecture changes into very manageable sizes for teams, which required a lot of involvement for people driving architecture initiatives, which also had day jobs because they were not architects. And then we also faced new realities. The zero interest rate policy period came to an end. There were investments besides stocks, ETFs, that became attractive, which caused a bump to our business model. We were VC funded still, and still are. The main effect was that it was getting less attractive to quickly raise another round for growth. So there we were, set up with an organization for massive growth with 7 heads of engineering and all these growth pains. So we needed to do something. We were able to sustain the current size for a while, and we were able to not do any layoffs or shrink the company in that time, as some of the big tech and other fintechs needed to do. But we went through a long period of steady state, and we knew that this would not be sustainable. So we went into a domain realignment, which is the part that now has the buzzwords of this talk. We were close to the thinking in domain-driven design, team topologies, and the flow engineering book came out while we were talking about the domain realignments. And we did it in a much more lightweight way than other people attending this conference might expect, or as Nina and Susanne just presented, where there was a very deliberate model to do this. In our world, we had 4 principles what we needed to do. We needed to get teams to a useful size, have more cohesion between the domains that were in teams, reduce the structural complexity to make alignment easier, and prepare for growth, because we were expecting that we would enter a growth phase again, so we didn't want to stunt that. So the approach we took was basically throwing all the domains at the wall, and in a small group of engineering and product leadership, mapped the upstream, downstream domains and found out basically how strong cohesion and a very lightweight value stream mapping, I'm not sure if you can call it that, so it's mostly dependency mapping exercise, and then trying to make do without throwing all the teams up in the air and halting the organization for a while, because everyone needed to find themselves again. So we came out of this exercise with fewer tribes, a slightly reduced number of teams, and some moving domains between teams, and some people changing roles and jobs. What we notably did not do in this exercise was talk about the collaboration models, or interaction models, as team topologies calls them. We only talked about cohesion. There was no platformization involved, which was something we did not do in this moment, because it would have made this effort much larger, introducing the thinking about these interaction models, refocusing teams. That was too big of a mission for us to take on. So we went without that. Some of that platforming is now taking place. Now we came out of this exercise, and teams naturally emerge into that space. So, which brings us basically to the present day, and it's still day one. We shrunk the organization. This is the new model. We have 3 tribes. 2 tribes focused on stream-based delivery for brokerage and custody. One is more customer-facing, one is more back-end facing, and a platform tribe. We are still growing the business. We're planning to hire another 80 engineers in the next 12 months, basically doubling the organization size. We just expanded to the UK, so it's still day one for us with new growth pains, but we'll approach them with one of our principles, which is progress over perfection. And this is the moment where I hand back to Lutz and we'll go to learnings.
Not perfection, no, back to Lutz. Yeah, one of my favorite topics, architecture facilitation, architecture management. So this is a bit harsh. It looks like we never really even hit the target. We never really hit the bullseye with our approaches, but I think it wasn't that bad. So we talked about the sort of grassroots approach we had in the beginning, where we were a smaller org, and basically the tech leads would just kind of figure it out amongst themselves. Don't take pictures of this, eh? And then we had the guild approach, or community approach, where the idea was to become a bit more strategic, right? And but it turned out there was no. We didn't really have the capacity there to actually drive topics. It was nice to get together and have a bit of an exchange, but when we said, okay, we really want to, well, if you really want to drive strategic topics, you need some time for this and capacity, right? And then they had to trade off, because none of them was kind of exclusive to the architecture group, they had to trade off delivery and working on strategic stuff. And delivery somehow always won, well, business. We even tried like a half-hearted enabling team approach. Well, not really, but for a short period, we had at least the concept of a dedicated team for strategic topics and architecture topics. But then people from this team quickly got pulled into sort of individual projects, and we like picked a new API gateway, and we had to do a lot of stuff around our kind of Kafka Confluent platform thing. And it never really became an actual enabling team working with teams. So how we're actually going to manage architecture or facilitate kind of a strategic approach to software architecture in the future, but it's still up there. We're still working on that. And I'm just going to skip this slide in the interest of time, because it's pretty much the same. And this is back to you.
Thank you. So yeah, for the takeaways from what we think about today is the guidance and principle-based governance approach is something that enabled us to get to where we are today. And the concept of product engineering was foundational to that. But we saw that we need to level up on context at scale. Like, unsurprisingly, what came natural to people in the early stages of the company does not come natural to people coming in when you're at 150 people, and you need to be very explicit about context. Having paved roads or forced paved roads for compliance reasons is something that supports that model with guidance and principle-based teams. But measuring, which we are now looking into, how are teams doing, is a problem if you don't have shared tools, shared mechanisms for that. So we have shared issue trackers and all of that, but we have, as Lutz explained, slightly different processes in all teams, which makes measuring tricky. This is an ongoing area of research for us.
Right, yeah, domain-driven design, I don't have to tell you. I guess everybody here, that you all love domain-driven design, and sort of the big ideas behind domain-driven design. It's really sort of embracing the domain also on the tech side. Have your bounded context driven by business capabilities. And so, of course, that worked well for us, and that's great. Also, stable product teams, strong sense of ownership work great. But all this domain-driven, so one thing I really underestimated, I think a lot of us did, is it gives you kind of a snapshot, a kind of a static snapshot at a certain point in time, but the business evolves so rapidly. Like when we started, we also expanded our product offering, right? We started with in the very early days, we started with only ETFs because that's much less work. But then as soon as you actually introduce shares, then you have all, for example, all the corporate action stuff and so on. And this explodes, the domain complexity. So it's really hard to anticipate how, what the right team size is going to be, or what the exact subdomains maybe within the subdomain are going to be. So you have to be really dynamic about this. You have to be prepared. It's not, it's not a thing. You don't set it up once. It's like we talked about, some other talked about the agile transformation or transformation processes, and also this Nina and Susanne did, right? It's not a thing you do once and then you're done, right? Great, I'm transformed, I'm done, and now we're going to be like this forever. It's not like I have my domain map and this is going to be like this forever. You have to be prepared to constantly adjust this and to constantly evolve. And this is a bit more work than I thought. Cool. And yeah, about value streams and team topologies, no secrets there. The product complexity that we have does not lend to easy mapping into separate value streams. So we got messy there, and we improvised when we did the domain realignment. Flow engineering, the book, offers some lightweight, workshopy ideas that would be something we would want to try in the next iteration, because it's more friendly for organizations that don't have a whole bunch of people set up to make these organizational changes. The regulatory requirements for platform require a lot of capacity there, so driving initiatives from the platform side becomes much more expensive there. So we have our platform teams very busy with foundational regulatory requirements for business continuity management and this goes against having capacity for engineering enablement, developer experience. And also, not everything that should be a platform can be yet. We have a lot of teams that eventually look like a platform and they talk like a platform, but the organization does not have the setup yet, and we need to morph it over time. So this will still take some time, and this is why it's still day one for us. And with that, we thank you for your time and bearing with us through the afternoon slot.